All right, folks, this is Michael with the Reason RX podcast and my co-hosting host.
Melanie.
Yes, thank you, Melanie. Melanie, the homeschool mom. So we're back here again with a discussion with award-winning teacher Scott Harris. We are recording this for the second time because Scott and I did this yesterday and a power outage made us lose the whole thing. So this is deja vu for us. It was a nice discussion. We'll see how nice it's going to be this time. Sometimes it's kind of hard to repeat stuff after you said it once already. It's like, I got to do this again. But, fun. So today, as we talked about last time, we're going to discuss writing as a tool. Its importance in education. We had mentioned before in the last podcast and in some others how writing should be used in all grades and all subjects. It's a very important tool. And we had gotten into a little bit of a discussion of how it helps us learn logic. We did that last time. And we've discussed its importance. So this is an important thing, I think, not just for teachers and parents, but or just for teachers and educators, but also for parents and business professionals in general, because everyone needs to write. Melanie and Scott, do y'all ever write in everyday life?
I do.
Yeah, I do a fair amount.
Yeah, so it's like y'all agree it's a skill that every adult needs, and it's very helpful.
I have a professor friend who he and I have co-authored some economics pieces for the local newspaper, and we've gotten the front page of the opinion section. Cool. And gotten the whole page. So it's quite a bit of writing.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's great.
How many words usually?
Oh, that's a good question. Don't know. I would have to. We just write the articles together, and we kind of know they're going to give us the whole page now when we write together.
Cool.
Oh.
Yeah, and I've had to write several student letters of recommendation, and also I have to make sure that my 3 kids are doing a good job writing their papers, so that they are getting somewhere with that skill. So, yeah, I think in different ways, but definitely busy with it. So.
Yeah, and that's an important thing. I think as we talked about before, Robin Olds, I think it was him in his book Fighter Pilot, mentioned that the number one thing that keeps people from getting a promotion in the military is having a superior who cannot write a good letter of recommendation. Because then the superior cannot present the person's qualifications well and concisely, cannot present his examples of things that back up what he's saying, cannot identify well the characteristics that someone needs in the military for that position. So the letter will probably go to someone who doesn't know the person who's up for a promotion at all. All they got to go on is a letter, and you get a crappy letter. What are you going to do? Dump it, you know?
And that's true in high school as well, that a lot of teachers write just the stereotypical, letter full of cliches. This is one of the best students I've ever had. That should never appear in a letter.
Yeah.
You want to make that student stand out somehow amongst the 3,000 or 30,000 other applicants. You should never talk about their GPA, which is what a lot of teachers do, and they talk about how hard they work and what good grades they make. That's what the resume is for, right? And all of that data is going to come from the school. You should be giving them insight to how is this student different? What is something this student has done that really makes them stand out?
Yeah. And then, so there we're also getting into the logical aspect of writing. I mean by that, how it helps you learn skills of logic, because to do that, Scott, I think, wouldn't you agree that a teacher needs to be an independent thinker in the first place? If they tend to think in stereotypes or not, and they're kind of like a second-handed thinker, don't think, like, grasp the world with their own eyes and values as much, they're not going to be able to see these insightful original, or won't be able to write these insightful original comments and anecdotes and things.
That's a good point. I have a little form they have to fill out when they request a recommendation letter, and I have a couple lines at the bottom. I said, "Why did you ask me to write your recommendation letter?" And you get the normal stuff on there, but one girl said, "Because you have a command of language."
Nice.
And she knew that was going to get her a letter that was going to be the non-cliche. And at my last school, they actually took a couple of my letters and blacked out the names and used them to train new teachers.
Cool.
Here's how you write recommendation letters.
You kind of fuzzed out or something a little bit there. You say at your last school or where?
Yes, at my last school, they used some of my letters as to show other teachers how to do it, and just blacked out the names. But I'll sometimes have teachers ask me, "Do I have a letter?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" "Well, do you have like a standard letter?" And I guess I don't know what they changed the names or something. But no, every kid is unique and different. You don't have a template. I don't.
Yeah, I agree. It's like the letter should arise organically from the nature of the thing being described. And since every student is different, every letter should be different. And I think
those things emerge over time. When I was coaching a swim team, when they would at the end of the year ceremony, we have the banquet or whatever, and I would talk about each of the seniors. Well, the stories I would tell, those would develop over the last 2.5 years, just things that you're storing in your mind that made this kid stand out. And that happens in the classroom over a semester as well. Mm-hmm. And those are the kinds of things that I think should go into a letter.
Mm-hmm. And then that reminds me, parents should be helping their kids to think ahead, to prepare and plan for the future. And students should be doing some of it on their own too. But on the part of the parent, they can let the kid teach their child that, okay, you need to be nice to some of your teachers and work with some of them, dig into your subject, do some independent research, do something that stands out so that 2 years from now, this person can write a letter for you. It's not just, here we're in school and here's a teacher and we do this test and that test and okay, we do this and we do that and now we go to the next class and okay, and then we got the final exam and the midterm and blah, blah, blah. No. Think of the future. There's more to it than that. We have to get into college and then you got to get a job. So talk to your college professors, work with them so they can write a letter of reference maybe 30 years later. Or high school teachers need to be ready to write a letter of recommendation to get into college.
That's a great point about what is the kid doing to earn a letter.
Yeah.
I have told a handful of students no, simply because I didn't know them. They were unbelievably quiet. Even when you call on them to participate, they would do everything they can to not participate. So they didn't make any noise. But you're basically furniture, and in a class of 35 kids, you've got to interact, you've got to come talk to me, do something. And so I would tell those kids, who's the teacher who knows you best at this school? And they would say, oh, Miss So-and-so, that's who you need to ask for your letter. I can't, write a generic one, because I think as many letters as those admissions officers see, they can tell when it's a lukewarm letter. And that's not doing you any favors.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm glad some people I've had in the past haven't asked me for a letter because I would have said no. But
another example of learning that, I had a student just email me from Auburn University, and he said that in a class he had a high B, almost an A, and he went to the professor's office hours and said, is there anything I can do, to knock it up to an A? And the professor said, I'll give you the A. And he was kind of surprised. He said, now let me tell you why I'm giving you the A. He said, you write the best emails. You're polite. You have great email etiquette.
Nice.
Well, that's the thing I teach them on the second day of my class is how to email a professor.
Cool.
And so there was something that kid did to earn, a little extra.
And then sometimes if someone asks a question like that, they might find themselves being a research assistant for a professor doing some original work. It might change the course of their life.
Absolutely, and that's what we talk about. How do you stand out in a university class of 300 people? You sit up front, you go to office hours, you introduce yourself, you write proper emails. It's not that hard to make yourself stand out because there's plenty of people who are trying to sit in the back of the class and play on their computers.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, absolutely, that leads to internships, that leads to recommendation letters. I've occasionally written letters for kids who didn't ask me for one. They were just so outstanding, I thought, I'm giving this kid a letter.
Yeah. Nice.
I think the experience I've had with students, I get to know them a little more as I see them with their family, because the parents will come here and I see them interact, and I used to go to the students' homes all the time. That was just kind of the way I had it set up, and you really, really get an insight into how the family works and the student is, interacting with the siblings and the parents, and so it's different, different ways of looking at them, but it's easier to write a letter about someone that you feel like you've been in their home, you see how they communicate and if they're respectful.
Yeah, then you're more sure you're knowing like the real person.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've written some kind of the same, Scott. Like, I haven't written many, but one student said that her counselor said it was like the best or one of the best she's ever read.
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of bad letters out there.
Yeah, so it's not like I'm so great. It's just like there's so much bad that you're being compared to.
Well, and one teacher I shared a room with said to his class, if any of you need a letter, let me know. And I was some of the kids in his class that were pretty bad. And I was like, no way am I writing a letter for that kid. Why would you? Because as a teacher, your name develops as a brand as well. You're sending these letters off to the same colleges. They start to notice your name and your school and the caliber of students. And
yeah.
It's having integrity. And then pushing the kids to earn the letter and do something good. And that creates good in society. And then we got to think of the long-term consequences. You just write a letter of recommendation so a student can go, then they might enter a profession that they don't really like and cause some injury or death to someone by sloppy work in medicine or whatever. So we got to consider some of them consequences that can happen. But then, of course, so letters of recommendation for teachers can write for students, but then as we talked about, there's also the similar thing of writing a letter for promotion. And then, of course, it's important in business emails, marketing. Someone needs to know how to write really well to do good marketing. And what was it you were saying yesterday about the beer ad?
Yeah, I show them as an example of writing. It was, I think, a Budweiser ad from 1941. And it is lovely and eloquent, and it makes having a beer sound like the most noble thing a man could do. I thought, wow, that's a really good piece of writing. I similarly have an article from the 80s, I think, or 90s, I guess, from Esquire magazine, in which they wrote in praise of a thermos and just how wonderful the thermos was. And again, kind of silly, but it was a really nice piece of writing. And then, today, I guess Budweiser in the 2000s had that ad campaign for Bud Light. and the line was, "Why ask why?" And it was just males doing stupid things, and they would say, "Why ask why?" And I thought, well, we've come from this noble, eloquent thing to silliness.
Consumption, yeah.
Yeah. And so, across the board in adult life, there's all kinds of things to write, all kinds of reasons to write, reasons we need to. We brought up another one yesterday. Before we get into that, given what we just said about writing, I think it'll make it easier for some people to understand how they can better analyze science or history books. 'Cause sometimes some people make the mistake of thinking history is boring or science is boring. No, it's the person who wrote the book who is boring, or the people who wrote the book who were boring. Because history is not boring. Science is not boring. What's boring is some person who has no passion for their subject. They should just not do it. Do something else.
Absolutely. In every field, there are people who can make you fall in love with that subject, even if you don't like it. In biology, there's E.O. Wilson. In physics, Richard Feynman.
Feynman. Is it Feynman or
history, Feynman? Yes, Feynman.
Okay.
In history, Jacques Barzin. And they're just such good writers.
Mm-hmm. Or like a guest we've had on the show recently, the writer Baron Heinrich. I love his stuff. Summer World, Winter World, The Mind of the Raven, many other books. He's won a lot of awards for his books and his writing. And then I have a book on the history of physics by Dr. Herbert Priestley, who was from England. He was in the U.S. after World War II. A physics PhD. You should see some of the sentence structure in some of his books. It's like, oh my gosh. I love using them and teaching them some kids some English because the sentences are so beautiful.
I have some writing books from the 1940s. I have a couple from the 1920s. And these are aimed at high school, college age students. And they're writing about grammar, but it's almost poetic because they have such a command of language that you're just reading this paragraph about how to use an adjective and you're like, this is beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that reminds me of a book by someone I mentioned before, Dr. Leonard Peikoff. He wrote a book, I think The Dim Hypothesis. It's very deep and philosophical, but I listened to it on Audible. It's like listening to poetry. It was just so amazing. Just because he put so much time into writing the book and was so demanding with his words. It was just beautiful.
Dr. Peikoff has a great line where he talks about the difference between academic writing and writing in the real world. And he said after he got a PhD, it took him about 1.5 years to de-louse himself from that writing style and write like a normal person.
Yeah.
And today when I was at the music store, I was doing some work there for the honors concert rehearsal. And I happened to be kind of standing in one spot of the store. And so I started looking through the music that was in the rack next to me. And hearing you guys talking about how really elegant writing can be found in the strangest places sometimes. But most delightful because it makes what they're saying seem all that much more believable and passionate. So I picked up a drumming book because I kind of want to keep my rudiments for drumming up. And I was looking through it. And I started reading the preface. This book is probably from the 1940s, 50s. And it's just beautiful writing. It even convinces you why a timpani should be a part of your drumming, not just the snare, not just the bass. So, I mean, it was really, really well written. And I was like, wow, that's just, you don't see that much. Usually it's geared toward children, play the drum, hit it hard, not too loud. You don't want to make your mom mad, but it was really nice, very pretty.
Cool.
But I think we have to look for that stuff too, and when we see it, call it out, because in a good way, because it's not every day that you open a book and you're just absorbed already by the prose, the way that
it's one
portray
thing.
themselves in the subject.
As a general principle, one thing I think it needs to be done more in this society is reward the good. People are, I think, focused too much on attacking or punishing or censuring the bad or the evil, and we have to, and that's important. But I think it's it's in our nature. We have to survive as living organisms. You got to do things like that. Avoid things that'll threaten your life. But there are certain ways you could do it, ways you could approach some things. Then we're getting into, instead of just maybe biological or metaphysical things, we're getting into the psychological and cultural. And I think people don't reward the good enough. Like, if how many times have you let someone come in front of you and they've waved? When you're driving along, hey, I'll let you in. I wave. It's like, I want to encourage that.
Yes, you have to wave. That's the rule.
And yeah, it's polite, and it's a little thing.
Right.
As I say, you want to encourage it. Say thank you. And then sometimes, like, some people are very big about not accepting a gift if they don't know a person, but to some extent, yeah. But sometimes it's like, I know someone's doing something because they like me in some respect, and it's like, I want to live in a culture where people can be benevolent. I don't want to say, no, I don't want this. I didn't earn it. I don't know you. If it's like someone buys me coffee, so what? Get over it. Like, say thank you. Talk to them.
Yeah, we talk about that in class. People really have a phobia toward compliments or people being nice. And I think it's really from a lack of self-esteem that if somebody says something nice, I like your shirt, we reflexively say, I like yours too, to get that spotlight off of us.
Mm-hmm.
The proper response to a compliment is thank you. And you don't have to say anything else. Mm-hmm. Just let that person be nice.
Yeah.
Actually put the effort into saying or buying you coffee. And you can always, return the favor down the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Be appreciative of people. And I've done that before. Like, Dr. Michael Fowler at UVA, he's done some really good work too on, he's got stuff online about the history of physics. He knows, and he's written articles explicitly about how it's important to teach physics from a historical perspective. I don't let it go. I wrote him, and I've told him I like what he does, and I've thanked him. That is important. He deserves that recognition and moral approval. We should not it's just like metaphysical, so what? It's like, he's like a piece of dirt. It's just there. No! This is a great accomplishment. We should, like, reward and give approval to and, like, promote in our world.
And that's how you network, too. A lot of my professor friends are exactly that. I read a book or I read a paper, and I started contacting them. Their Facebook, or in the olden days, you'd write a letter, and now I do stuff with them. They come to my school, or they've sent me to a conference because the relationship develops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, so that's...
You mentioned about teachers having to be able to write good letters. I think with reading in the classroom, there's often teachers who have a dislike for elevated writing or anything that's poetic, that's not poetry but poetic, some of this language from the 40s or the 20s. The kids find it absolutely aspirational.
Cool.
And I think we have to be okay with them looking at beautiful language or sad language, or just, it seems like we kind of boil things down to the lowest common denominator. And that's, like the history books have been, all the beauty and the passion has been stripped out in the name of somehow making it more academic, and they're just horrible to read.
Yeah. Yeah. like I thought of earlier when we were talking about some of this, and that's a good example of what you said. But I'd said that some subjects aren't boring. It's just the people who read about them who are boring. And
Right.
that reminded me, there's some people who've done some really good writing on ancient Greece and ancient Rome, like C.M. Baura. I think he wrote a book called The Greek Experience, just beautiful. And of course, Edith Hamilton. A lot of people have heard of Edith Hamilton because of her writing on mythology, but she's written about a book, The Greek Way and the Roman Way, and those are really good, really interesting. Bring it to life more.
Yeah, the kids actually just got done reading that, one of hers, in their online class. So, yeah, great. They loved it.
I have a book on Greece and education called Paideia by a German guy, Werner Jaeger. And the book is so well written that I've read the first 2 chapters probably 20 times. And I can't make myself start the 3rd chapter because it's so deep, it's so poetic, it's so philosophical that I just keep reading them and contemplating. I am going to have to move on because he does have 2 other volumes to that book, which I now got from Amazon. And so I'm going to have to move on with it.
Everything's limited and finite. You can read those 2 chapters only so long.
Yeah, but how many books or chapters or articles are worth rereading any of it?
Mm-hmm.
But that's the kind of effect, a good writer can.
Yeah, agreed. And so, you're going to say something, Scott? What?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So there's a lot of reasons why writing is important. How it needs to be developed no matter what our age, business professional, parent, student, of course. But as we talked about yesterday, another example that we had that didn't get recorded because of a power outage on my side, woohoo, that was fun, was a parent maybe writing a letter to a school about a teacher.
Yes.
Scott and I were discussing that about, that's another place where writing will come up. You want to, maybe you're not happy with a teacher or something, you want to shoot off a letter. Think about it before you write. And then, in terms of the benevolent thing we discussed, don't necessarily assume the teacher is being malevolent on their part. Maybe you could have a meeting with the teacher and try to help them. I mean, what's wrong with that? You and some other parents could go in. We want a meeting with the teacher to talk about our kids and see, okay, this is a problem. Can we help? What can we do to support you? Try to work on helping improve the person first before you tear them down and try to get them fired.
Well, yeah, to your first point, never write the angry email. That just never goes well. And that goes for parents and teachers both. Don't respond when angry. Another great tip is to show it to another adult before you send it. And say, is this coming across as harsh? I'm very good at writing emails. I've had a lot of experience, especially when I was coaching with angry parents. And I got much better at it because initially you do respond and say, you're being unjust with what you're saying.
Yeah.
But you're not going to win with those people if they already dislike you. So showing it to another adult is really good. It helps you clarify your thinking style because they'll say, well, what do you mean by this? And then another point we talked about was to only address 2 or 3 big things. Yeah, when you get those 2-page emails, do not respond to all of that. Pick 1 or 2 of the big things, explain it, and that's it.
And then try to have some friends who don't always agree with everything you say. Try to have some that'll disagree, and some that'll give you more objective advice on maybe what you should write or what you shouldn't. But
yeah, I mean that's definitely a real asset in a friendship, especially if they can be honest with you to that level. They don't feel like they have to sugarcoat or protect your feelings. That's somebody that's great to have, as a friendship or a spouse. So, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that even came up in talking to a friend the other day. He was saying how, I've known this guy for, I don't know, 3, 5, 7 years or something, and he was saying that, he was recommending me to someone else and say, yeah, you gotta, like, I don't know if he actually told the other person this, but he was saying that, yeah, if, like, I'm wrong, Michael will tell me. He doesn't just say, oh, yeah, go ahead and do it. When I'm wrong, he tells me. And at the time, it pissed me off, but now I realize he's right, and I thank him for it.
Well, that's a great friendship there.
Truth, yeah.
Well, and self-esteem is a huge role in that. You have to be able to hear criticisms.
Yeah.
But the person giving them has to be fair and objective. So I mean, it's a two-way street.
It depends on the age of the person, their values, how well they think and everything. Different factors you gotta take into account to decide what to do and how to do it when you're talking.
Yeah.
Like, of course, you could be harsher on a 40-year-old than you can on a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
You say something to a 40-year-old and it's, yeah, okay, cool, thanks. A 4-year-old, it's like you say the same thing and it could, like, threaten his very existence, in his own mind, psychologically, But, so there's a lot about why writing is important. Comes up in all these different areas. So then we need to think about, okay, so to back up, first it occurred to me, like education is, primary education, the basic thing is preparing a child for adult life by teaching them the material they need for adult life. You teach them the material in both its proper form and proper content. And as we see, this is one thing that comes up all the time in life, all these different areas. So because of its generality, that's one thing that's important. Writing is important to learn, but it also teaches us how to reason properly. So those are some things we could talk about, also about how it teaches us how to reason, and then look at how we should teach it from elementary school through high school. Scott, what?
Well, that's one thing we talked about yesterday, is that good writing is brief writing. And that one thing I think that happens in school too much is we tend to do, research papers are always elaborating and so on. And that is a skill to be learned. But kids will tell you, and they know which teachers they can get away with this, that if you ramble enough that you'll get a good grade. And that's not good writing. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't fly in college, and we shouldn't teach it. So I focused on, let's do lots of short writing. Let's write less more often. And it doesn't necessarily have to be graded. So now when we say we're going to write something, they're not dreading, it's a 5-page paper. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We do some assignments that are 1-page typed, and you're not allowed to go over onto a second page. That forces them to condense their thought, to really identify a clear thesis, support it, and then conclude. This week, we're going to do some assignments on 4x6 cards, and then we're going to go next week to 3x5 cards. You've really got to know what you want to say it quick and clearly, and think about the words that you want to convey the message with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because as we mentioned last time, I think in a prior podcast, we talked about this, some anecdote, some story. Someone is writing a letter to a friend, and at the end he says, "Sorry, I'm writing you this 10-page letter. I didn't have time to make it shorter."
And that transfers to the adult world. The letter to the editor, an executive summary, because your boss is going to read it as you're going down the elevator. He wants to see that paragraph or two. Or abstract for a professional paper. They've got to be able to synthesize their thought and state it relatively briefly.
Mm-hmm. Good. And so one way you teach us, you say, is to have them write a 1-page or 2-page essay, but then you try to get them to put things on a 4x6 card or a 3x5 card to make them really summarize things. I think, that's an important skill, knowing what the basic idea is and how to express it. That'd be useful also, it occurred to me, like on the SAT and ACT, having to read something and know what the main idea is. They ask about that. I mean, not that
Right.
I regard the SAT and ACT as really important. It's just a little social hoop we got to jump through. There's much, much more important things in life, but it does help on that little test. But and then, so now, what are some ways we can, how can we teach writing through school, elementary school through high school?
Just
Well, like I said, I think we should write less more often, and lots of short, small pieces where they're given a particular task so that they don't have to try and bring all of their writing skills to this assignment at once and feel overwhelmed. Let's do a thing where we work on adjectives and write the same sentence using 3 different adjectives and then or 5, and then which one really conveys the message the best. That's not that difficult. It's easy. It's a little bit fun, and they're picking up the skill of word choice and how it changes the meaning of a sentence.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different factors to consider. I think from some things I've seen, it seems like for most boys seem to write different than most girls. From what I've seen, what I've heard, boys seem to want to use adjectives more than girls. There's some differences like that. And then, girls seem to develop some language skills earlier, whereas boys are developing other cognitive skills. But then, the research shows that when they get into their 20s or so, they're about the same. They go on a different path to get to the same place. And then you can see that language develops more in girls, but, we got to work on making them conceptual, because it's a well-known fact that you got some junior high school girl or high school girl who talks a lot but says nothing. They're very good at using language, but they're very bad at saying anything, unfortunately.
Well, that's what I mentioned. I had a student explaining why he had missed my test.
And let me say, that's just some girls, not all girls, folks. Okay.
I've had this student for 2 semesters, but he nearly refuses to speak. Just is very, very quiet. So he's given me his explanation. It's all over the place. It has multiple angles to it, and I'm getting a little bit lost in what he's trying to say. And I finally said to him, "You have 10 seconds to tell me your story." and he put together a coherent sentence, and it all came out. And so I like putting boundaries on that. Another line I use is, "Tell it to me like I'm 6." And you can see them in their head simplifying what they're going to say, which is really they're integrating the thought. They're stripping out the superfluous parts, and now they're getting to some coherent thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I like the boundaries of 1 page, 3x5 card, 10 seconds.
right.
We even last night talked about tell me a story in 10 words or 6 words. Right, and I read that in a writing book one. They had a sad story in 6 words, and it was for sale, baby shoes never worn.
Oh.
So I think those are great exercises. Kids often want the opposite of boundaries because I want to be able to express myself and say you haven't learned to express yourself yet.
Yeah.
You'll get no boundaries when you learn to work within the boundaries
Mm-hmm.
and learn the skill and when to break the rules. But you have to learn the rules first.
Yeah.
And of course, I think people know that there's some boys that are like some girls I talked about, that some boys that can just run their mouth a whole lot and never say anything. Blah, 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 blah. I think I met some people like that. It's just like kind of make your brain shut down because there's just so much verbal noise, like verbal stuff, and just so little information.
Well, and how about teachers who fear silence and they feel like in every gap there has to be constant sound.
Mm-hmm.
But the music teacher can tell us, those quiet parts are the parts that allow you to absorb and to enjoy, and it changes the pace.
Mm-hmm.
And it also provides a space for a kid to ask a question.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what was it? I think Mr. Rogers used to talk slow on purpose because he knew that really young kids took longer to process information. And now, unfortunately, because of supposed child research, a lot of the young stuff for kids are just go, 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 and it like flips all the time from what I've heard. But that's not good because, Rogers knew that you needed to start developing the kid for the future.
Well, if you watch the Baby Einstein videos, those things are painstakingly slow, precisely because it's allowing the time for the, infants to older kids to process that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and remarkably, we've used those. I have a lot of them still, which is, we hang on to that. But what's interesting is the kids would calm down to it. I mean, they actually would. So there's that time to process, because, if they kept their pace, they're not going to get it anyway. So they had to, it was engaging,
Yeah, there's some child psychologists out there that say your kid should not see any screen until they're 6 or something. I don't know what world those people live in, but I know that Baby Einstein bought me a half hour that I could go make laundry and fill the bottles and they really were a lifesaver.
Well, I don't think they mean it in that respect. That's like very different than what they mean. I think just mean based on the kid's nature and their cognitive development. You got to do things to keep the kid occupied while you get some stuff done sometimes, but I think that's a different issue than what they're addressing.
Sure.
But, in terms of the boundaries, that reminds me of the Institute for Excellence in Writing. They got some good programs from what I've seen. I've looked at their website a little bit, listened to a few of their products on DVD. And they have some really good ideas for writing, starting out in elementary school and then developing into high school. So, for example, I don't remember exactly, it's been a while since I looked at some of this, but they might do something like get an essay, a one-page thing, or maybe a paragraph, easy paragraph for a younger kid, and circle the key words. Okay, now the kid knows kind of what the topic is and what some key words are, and now the child writes the sentences in their own words, or an older kid might write an essay in their own words. So we start developing like that. So they got some boundaries and they got some concepts to use, and then they can develop there to doing more of their own writing, or with fiction. Instead of just having the kids do a fiction thing out of nowhere, they start with a known story like the tortoise and the hare, or Mary Had a Little Lamb, or something, and write Mary Had a Little Lamb in your own words, and write the tortoise and the hare in your own words, and then they might say, okay, what happened before Mary Had a Little Lamb, before that part, or what happened before the tortoise and the hare story, or what happened after. And then it's helping the kids have boundaries and fixed characters they're not going to make up themselves, and then write a story based on that.
And that's a great example of, in English, I think one of the hardest things for students and probably English teachers is helping kids develop their own style or voice, as they call it in English, because they don't know what their style is.
Mm-hmm.
But they're going to figure that out as they learn to master these particular techniques, punctuation, thinking what happens next, and so on. And that's going to emerge over time. And I always tell them, I can't tell you what your style is, right? That's a function of your personality. Again, exposing yourself to good writers, and you borrow bits and pieces and steal elements of style from the good writers you've read, and then it starts to come out through your personality.
Yeah, you got to look at some of that stuff, just like some grammar. Maybe first it's got to be mechanical, and then once you master it, then it can be more organic in your own. Same thing in some music, like we talked about Mozart. He's doing some stuff that's maybe somewhat mechanical at first. Got to learn the basic notes, some basic things about playing a piano, and then with these mechanics down, and when they become your own, then you can start being creative with them and using them for your own purposes instead of just doing the exercise for the exercise sake, kind of, in order to be able to master it. But similar with grammar and some things about writing, we got to look at how someone else tells a story, and like pick out certain limits on that, like keep the characters and use them to tell a story, or keep the timeline and then develop your own characters on it, or instead of Mary had a little lamb, Bob had a little cow or something, and write your own story about Bob and the cow. So keep some stuff the same, change a few elements, and then people can learn the skills they need of character development, picking out characters, plot, storyline, theme. They can develop that, and then eventually have those mastered, so they can write that more on their own, from their own experience and life and reason and imagination when they're in high school or later.
I like the word theme, and I teach them that your writing needs to have a theme in addition to your thesis. And of course, they don't know what I'm talking about, but a movie often has a theme. I tell them your theme is your thesis shrunk down to the fewest possible number of words. And it's a little thought nugget that you can hold in your head, so that as you write, every sentence, it's easy to tell, is this supporting my thesis? Is it advancing the story I want to tell? Because so many kids, when they do try to elaborate, they have all these extraneous sentences and these things that go on tangents. All that needs to be stripped out because it's not advancing the story you want to tell. So that's part of that pre-thinking they've got to do before they start writing. What is it I want to say? And what do I want the reader to walk away with?
And that's, in a different way, just what Mozart did, Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff, Verdi. You got some theme that's being expressed in the piece of music.
Well, yeah, that's true. Very complex, of course, because there's key, there's meter, which instrument is bringing it out at the time. Is it a vocal? There's so many. But that's a great analogy. Yeah. And you can really just listen to a piece of music, and sometimes you can tell who wrote it because their style is. And the same with reading an essay.
Yeah.
Take the author off and see if you can figure out, well done. It's kind of neat, to see.
Painting.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly.
That's a Rembrandt. That's a Vermeer. That's got to be a Bouguereau, or however you pronounce his name.
And if we put those two things together, you guys just said, that would make an interesting writing assignment. So if you think about Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, all those guys, they often all sang some of the same songs, and they were called standards because everybody did them. Yeah. And it was who could put the spin on Mac the Knife or whatever and sing it the best way. So we take that to what Michael just said about take a story, Mary Had a Little Lamb, all right, and let's all write that story, all 30 kids in class, and what happens to the lamb next, and who makes it interesting, who goes over the top and like, well, no, that's kind of too much. But that's an opportunity for them to develop their voice and play around within the confines of a common assignment.
And I think the Institute for Excellence in Writing got that idea in whole or in part from studying what Benjamin Franklin did. Ben Franklin, in order to learn to write, got great writers, read what they did, and then tried to rewrite some stuff on his own. Just, picking out a keyword or looking at the paragraph or article and seeing what the theme was and trying to write about it on his own. And I think in his autobiography, if I remember right, this is a little shaky, but he might have said that sometimes he found that he'd write better than they did. And he was a good writer, very good mind. But that can, so the same basic idea can be done in some nonfiction contexts, nonfiction types of writing, not just fiction. Similar thing could be done with some biology, natural history, as Baron Heinrich said, and I've agreed for a long time. He's thought of this for a long time, I'm sure. I've thought of it for a long time. He says, no kid ever gets interested in a freaking molecule. You get interested in an animal, a living thing. So if they do more natural history as biology as they should in high school and learn stuff that's on their level, so they have the foundation for understanding biochemistry and genetics later. When they get the foundation, they're doing things that are interesting, and there's like a lot of things they could write about, like write about a bluebird, write about a blue jay, write about a hawk or some other like plant or animal in your area. Make some natural history story, but as we've said, partly to do that, they need examples of writing that's not freaking boring.
It's so important to get them that opening question in class, or, we used to call it the anticipatory set. What is it that we do that's going to get them intrigued? It ain't the molecule, right? So Friday, I, in economics, was supposed to talk about legal institutional arrangements and how these are necessary for long-term growth in economies. On a Friday. No kid is going to get excited about that. So my opening question was, turn and talk to your neighbor and give me a ballpark figure on how many laws you think there are in America. From federal, state, local, the IRS, all of that put together.
I think we have a word for that in mathematics. It's called infinity. Right?
Yeah. So they, of course, immediately went to talking about this, and some of them, were like, 5,000. And I'm like, are you kidding me? But others were in the million. So then I tell them that the last time the government attempted this was to count the laws was in 1988, and they haven't attempted since. But I said, stupidly, I attempted last semester, and so I now give them the handout. And I spent about 4 hours on it, looking at the U.S. code and just all of the laws and so on. And then it had some nice quotes on there from, not Cicero, but someone like that, about the more laws there are in a society, the less justice. So we looked at some of the laws and how could anybody know this many laws? Why would more laws lead to less justice? We talked about Stalin's enforcer of the secret police who said, find me the man and I'll find you the violation, right? That they had so many laws, they could take anybody off the streets. And so now we're having this interesting discussion about why these things are necessary and how many laws. And now I sneak in the learning.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very clever. Wonderful.
Cool. But so then they could go on to write some 3x5 card or essay about something like that.
So what law, a common thing to say is, what law, if you were king for a day, what law would you propose? I like to do the opposite. What law would you get rid of that would make society better? Yeah. What school rule would you get rid of that would make the school better?
Yeah. But, so they need more motivation, like every human being, and they need examples of good writing, and then they can develop that more on their own. And
when they get to write a short essay on what's removing what school rule would make this place better, they're not bored. They're not asking, is this for a grade? They're engaged and they're writing.
Yeah.
What were a couple of them that they said, Scott? What were a couple of the laws that were rules that they said?
I actually didn't have them right on that topic on Friday, but you'll get various answers, but they center around the fact that we get new rules because somebody does something stupid, and then there's a new rule. The problem they realize is that the stupid kids, right, the 3% of kids on any campus who are causing 90% of the problems, they don't follow the rules anyway.
Yeah.
Right. And now it's the good kids who do try to follow the rules who have yet another restriction on what they're allowed to do. And then we talk about that principle in society at large.
Which could segue well into gun control and
any issue.
Yeah, just about any. Thoughtful. That's great.
So they got to have some really good stuff to read, good examples, and like we mentioned, you can't really learn to write well unless you've seen other people writing well. There are people who are geniuses, but there's no one who invents language and gets all the rules of definition and discovers logic and discovers induction and concept formation and the nature of reason all on their own in isolation. We're finite and limited in many ways. Our lifespan's finite. We really need good examples, really great examples of writing, and examples of people who are passionate about a subject in order to see that and learn to write well about some subjects. So,
and that's a great thing, that put that on the kids. Say, bring me a favorite paragraph of yours, from a poet, an article. It could be from a TV commercial, whatever. Think is clever, funny, beautiful, sad, happy.
Yeah, good. And so, we could start in elementary school, work on summarizing something simple. Think about what a sentence means in a word or two. Think about what a paragraph means in a sentence. Think about what a whole page means in a sentence or a paragraph. Develop that slowly through the years. They need to learn to summarize. And then they need to learn from elementary through high school to be able to have, know what's a concrete or example to an abstraction. What's the abstraction and what's the concrete mentioned in an essay? When is it important to give some concrete examples and when is it not? Because, as we talked about before, if you don't have a concrete individual thing that your concept stands for, that you're naming, if you don't have an example, so to speak, or a so-called application, then you don't know what you're talking about. I don't think that thing really qualifies as knowledge. Knowledge is knowledge of the world, and if there's not something in the world that you're identifying with this word or concept, then it's failed to be a concept yet in your mind. Similar with inductive generalization, you got to know what things you induce that from and be able to at least sketch out some of the main steps in going from the evidence of the senses to that higher level generalization. Even saying the Earth goes around the sun is an abstract, high-level generalization that requires you know about shadows in the first place, the seasons, how the know some facts about the stars, and know like how far the moon is from the Earth, the sun is from the Earth, and other things like that in physics and astronomy. So it takes a while, but writing helps teach us a lot of logical skills, as I say, about making sure something's really knowledge and you know what you're talking about in the world. Helps you see if you actually have a cogent logical argument, like we talked about with writing an angry letter. All you doing is writing a stream of consciousness and expressing your emotions. And in some cases that's fine. You might want to sit down, bang that out, write it out. You put your feelings and ideas into words, and then go write the letter after a few drafts that you'd send to someone. So, we're not saying, like, about what we said at the beginning of the show, that that's totally wrong and stupid. It has value. It's just not...
Pre-writing is the key.
Yeah.
Too many kids try to sit down and spit out an essay all at once, and that's always going to be bad writing.
Yeah. And then that's another thing that we need to learn, like teachers should do, besides some of the things we said about summarizing or giving examples and all that. Another thing is teachers need to learn to go through more drafts of essays before accepting a final one. Because, if we're going to use writing to help us think better, which it does, that's why writing was invented in human history, then you need to address the thinking skills in the writing as well. Like, this point B doesn't follow from point C. You should get point C and put it after point B, and then you need to write up point A. Okay, now you have A, B, C. Now it's a better essay. Or, oh, look, you're talking about A1 here, and then you talk about other stuff, and there's A sub 2 here. A1 and A2 are similar. They should go together. So rearrange your essay. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things like that can be done and that need to be done so students learn to write better, but we got to remember the basic behind that is having students learn to think and reason and be logical better. We can't write and communicate unless we got the thought behind it. Like I read yesterday from this book, Writing and Thinking by Forster and Stedman, a book, copyright 1941. It says here, I'll read a little bit. It says, first page, writing and thinking are organically related to each other. This fact is at the heart of the problem of literary composition. The problem confronting a person who sits down to write may be stated very simply. Given, a thought or feeling. Required, words that will express this thought or feeling and convey it to the reader unchanged. The solution may be stated just as simply. The words required for the expression of the thought or feeling are the words inherent in the thought or feeling itself. They are not cunningly devised by the writer, invented and arranged by him with a view to impressing the reader. He does nothing but find them in the place where they spring to life, i.e., in the mind. Writing, in other words, should be organic, not mechanic. The form is mechanic, says Coleridge, when on any given material we impress a predetermined form, unquote. As when the gardener trims a cedar tree in order to force it into the unnatural form of a pyramid. Then quoting Coleridge again, he says, The organic form, on the other hand, is innate. It shapes as it develops itself from within, and the fullness of its development is one and the same with the perfection of its outward form. Such as the life is, such is the form. And then he goes on, but I'll finish the quote there. And there's other good writing and ideas here, but one more thing, he says, he says some things, and he's kind of summarizing, I think. I could be wrong, but I have to look at the whole thing. But it says, writing and thinking, then, are merely two aspects of the same thing, whether we refer to the whole poem, short story, or expository article, or to its constituent sentences. So, writing and thinking are organically related, as he says. And he says, what is a sentence? It is a group of words expressing a complete thought or feeling. So, it should be organic. We got to develop some things mechanically. That's the nature of it. You might have to learn some rules of definition or rules of induction, maybe a little mechanically at first, but then they become part of your thinking and your organic self. Because rules of definition are just they're identifying how the mind works. It's not like something artificially imposed on us from outside. It's in us already. We just got to make sure we see how to do concepts right or how to do inductions right. But I think that's an important point, that writing should develop organically and express your thoughts. But that's got to be developed by, one reason I brought that up is because you cannot write well unless you have thoughts to write about. I think that's something that seems to be, even though it seems obvious, it's something that seems to be unknown or not really taught or developed in the culture or in schools enough. It's just, you just write. And that's why some kids BS, because they don't have an alternative. We just got to write a certain amount of words and we got to write, but they don't have the thoughts or experiences to really put into words well. And part of that's probably for having the kids do stuff that's over their level at the time. If the junior high school kid was told to write about quantum mechanics, what are they going to say? But we need to develop that slowly through the years. Work on fiction and nonfiction, teach students logic in an age-appropriate way, develop things slowly. Logic shouldn't be something that's just taught in one semester when you're in high school. It should be something that's taught year after year, course after course, over the whole of your high school, of your education, elementary, junior high school, high school. It takes a long time to really get it. I think grammar should be taught more longer term also. Sometimes it's in 6th grade or 8th grade or something. You take a grammar course or do grammar and part of English and learn all this stuff at once, and that's a big mistake. Not everyone's ready for it. Too much too soon, like a fire hose. It needs to be spread out, because grammar is very important in writing, for one thing. That's not why it needs to be spread out. It needs to be spread out so people can get it and they're age appropriate, but I bring it up here because grammar is important in good writing. So, any last words on writing, Scott?
Do it. Do it a lot.
Yes.
And I have a quote from one of my writing books, and the author said, "How do I know what I think until I see what I say?" I have to write to really be able to think.
Yeah.
And so even just putting down bullet points, right, to get the kind of key ideas out of your head and onto paper, and then you start building around that. And usually from that, we call it a word web, will emerge your thesis, that this is the thing I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
So the mistake then is to not write at all until you think you have it fully formed in your head.
Yeah.
It's much easier to form it by writing and then sit down to write the formal piece.
And that shows interplay between like writing and thinking and logic and learning it in school. You write, you write down a little bit, and the teacher says, "Okay, you're not getting what's going on because all these examples are very different. You need examples of the same type of thing, and you can get a general idea. You wrote down milk and Martian and SpongeBob. What do they have in common? Nothing. Okay, let's write down SpongeBob and like some Martian cartoon character and some other cartoon character. Okay, now the main idea is cartoon characters. Now how are you going to put them in a story? We can have a story where SpongeBob meets Millie the Martian and then some other cartoon character. But start with something simple and some things like that, and then they can learn skills of logic as they're developing. Make sure they got examples for lower level concepts they learn, and then when they're in high school, if it comes up in elementary school and junior high school all the time, then it'll be natural for them to demand examples when they're older. And something like that is not a complicated thing. You got to wait till high school to teach. Maybe the rules of definition, knowing what the essence of something is, but to some extent you can start teaching that when you're younger, because a lot of people know what a table is. You're not going to learn that. You don't got to wait until high school. Or a dog or a cat. People know there's some things of a basic nature, and you can describe that to some extent. And then they're starting to learn about summarizing and essentializing and defining, and then it can develop like a plant or flower as they get older, more organically, get more complicated with and about the logic of examples, and more complicated with and advanced with the idea of essence, and start to teach them about induction when they're older. But it can be done implicitly when they're younger, and then when they're older they can explicitly deal with inductions because you would have let them through it already. Like, they're not stupid when they're younger, It's like, oh look, it didn't rain for a while and it was dry, so the plant died. They're generalizing, They can do things like that, and then when they get older, it can be a lot more complicated, like something in cancer or heart attacks or autism or something. But we got to take it slow and break it down and develop it through the years. Writing and thinking and logic go together, and education's about teaching someone to use their rational faculty, essentially, getting them ready for adult life. And so writing should be done in every subject because that's the thing that writing does. If a subject is meant to teach them about using their conceptual faculty and preparing them to be an adult, well then they should do the subject and they should write in it. So cool. Any last thoughts, Melanie or Scott?
I like how you guys laid it out. It was very easy to understand. It's great.
Cool. So, we'll stop there and let the folks digest this.
Go write something.
Yeah.
That's right.
And slowly start to learn some logic, learn some writing skills, some grammar. Unfortunately, there's like some weird ideas about grammar nowadays, and people are kind of anti-intellectual and anti-grammar, but I mean, if using some grammar helps you like not get into an argument with someone, what's wrong with that? It helps you communicate better, therefore you're more likely to get the job. You can convince someone of something. You can show them that you're right instead of them, or you can see that they're right instead of you, with some grammar and some logic there. It helps you communicate. It helps you get along better. It helps you avoid arguments. So what's wrong with that? Let's please be more grammatical and logical so we can like live better and get along better and everything. But yeah, write, look up some writing books, read some logic. There was like a few books I'll recommend in the show notes, because you can't just trust any logic book out there nowadays, because some of them are kind of irrational and weird. But some old writing books, some grammar, some logic, it'll benefit you and those you love and the culture tremendously. And if you're a teacher, do it, please. All right, so thanks guys for listening. Thanks, Scott, for another good discussion.
Thank you, Scott.
Enjoyed it.
So we got a lot more still to discuss with Scott. Note-taking, ideas in education, like the idea of learning styles and all that stuff.
Yes.
Guide on the side. We got a lot more we could discuss. Conversation after conversation after conversation. All right, cool. So thank y'all guys very much, and thanks folks for listening. And if you have any questions, let us know, and we will talk to y'all soon.